There's been some new developments, and I think you had the PDF of.
Yeah, I got the Washington Post story, and I just want to start right here, though.
You don't need a smug "I told you so" from me. And smug it would be, because tell you I most certainly did.
I just wanted to start, shout out to Mallory Archer, because this story, I'm not even going to front. It was predictable. So this is a PDF because it was behind a paywall, but it is from the Washington Post yesterday, January 4th. Mm-hmm. What happened to Wall Street's post-Floyd bet on black banking? And I think this is just wonderful and predictable. In 2020, Paul Judge and Ryan Glover, both seasoned black entrepreneurs, started work on a plan to help solve one of America's most intractable social problems, the yawning wealth gap between white households and black and Latino families. Just moving down here a little bit, launched amid the racial justice protests that followed the police. And so this was the Greenwood banking platform. Launched amid the racial justice protests that followed the police killing of George Floyd in 2020. Greenwood quickly drew support from prominent black celebrities, speaking of our last segment discussion, including music producer Jermaine Dupri and banking giants such as Wells Fargo and JP Morgan Chase. Glover and Judge boasted that 700,000 potential customers had signed up for Greenwood's wait list before it even launched products. But in 3 years since, and after a second round of funding that valued the company at $325 million, Greenwood has failed to meet some of its initial goals, according to the review of public statements and interviews with company leaders and former employees. Less than a quarter, about 150,000 of the people on the waiting list opened accounts, and Greenwood has been slow to launch promised financial products, including credit cards and business loans. They have produced a private club in Atlanta, a website that builds itself as the Black LinkedIn, and a production studio. But in terms of the banking financial products that it promised, there has been little to none. They're talking about the underbanking of Black and Latinos and how this was supposed to help with that, realizing that now the median wealth, a household's assets minus debts of white families stands at $285,000 compared to $44,900 for black families and $61,600 for Hispanic families, according to the Federal Reserve. So trying to address that is where these endeavors claim that they're stepping in. If folks remember, I was briefly a part of one of these conversations when still with the Department of in the School of Communication at Morgan when Netflix came around, sprinkling some of its $100 million, about 2% of its total deposits. And then in October 2020, tens of thousands of people had signed up for the waiting lists, and Glover and Judge recruited rapper activist Mike Render, who goes by the stage name Killer Mike, to be the public face of the brand in exchange for an equity stake in the company. Money began to pour in. By March 2021, before it had even launched a product, Greenwood had raised millions from financial giants like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo, who didn't return calls to comment on this story. Talking about the well, here's where they're talking a little bit, just to move ahead a little bit here. They're talking about how there are only a handful of black banks and that this became something, as we've discussed here on a number of occasions, became an issue for Greenwood's promise because A, it's not a bank, B, it made a promise, that is, a Judge and Glover had promised that they would use a black bank to be the backer of Greenwood, which is a financial services platform, not a bank, despite its promotion by Killer Mike and others as such. But it's not a bank. It's a fintech, financial tech platform that's supposed to just be a conduit to an actual bank. So they had promised they would get a black bank to back them, but couldn't because there aren't black banks big enough to actually do it. Not only are there only 17 now left in existence, that is black banks, but the ones that exist aren't big enough to do it. So they had to go to the white coastal bank, which again, we've talked about here in some detail in previous shows, because Greenwood is an online banking platform, but doesn't have a banking license. And to have customers' accounts insured by the FDIC, they must partner with a traditional bank. Glover initially pledged that Greenwood would partner with a black-owned bank, but instead decided to work with Coastal Community Bank in Everett, Washington, a bank which has a mostly white executive management team. Glover said he couldn't find a black bank big enough to support their scale. Again, this is a point we've been making forever. And Coastal already had established relationships. Again, part of the reason why black people can't get access to venture capital. They don't have the relations with high-profile startups or bigger banks. It goes on to talk about the run-in with the Gathering Spot and the lawsuits and the removal of leadership. And then it concludes with this example here. Dominic Holmes, a marketing consultant from Michigan, said he signed up for Greenwood waiting list in 2020 after learning that Killer Mike was one of the company's founders. But he closed the account 3 months later, he said, after learning Greenwood wasn't a traditional black bank and had partnered with Coastal Community Bank. Now Holmes says he's researching traditional black-owned banks where he can move his money. And saying that we're cheering for Greenwood to become what it promised to be, because to someone, this is Ashley Bell, the co-founder of the National Black Bank Foundation, because someone who is raising capital to create new black banks in this country, when you go to the big black banks on Wall Street right now, that well is dry because Greenwood hit the market at the right time with the right message. So I just want to highlight how this story concludes, that the head of the National Black Bank Foundation is acknowledging a point we've been making here for quite a while, that the claim to independence and sovereignty that's supposed to come with black banking and black ownership is intimately tied to an ability to get more investment and venture capital and support by bigger white-owned banks. And Ash, I think is a he, is saying right there that they can't even go to those bigger institutions anymore on Wall Street because they already gave all their money to this Greenwood project, and this Greenwood project isn't even a bank, and it isn't even doing what it claimed it was going to do. So
You don't need a smug "I told you so" from me. And smug it would be, because tell you I most certainly did.
Look. So I was doing my best to try to find this clip, but if I send this link, could you skip ahead all the way to like 30 in the 30s? Because I already got all the way through 32, and I still haven't found it. But if you can't, that's cool. But I just like
this link. It's a New York Times link. That's the one.
Yeah, it's a Sway podcast. But she asked him some basic banking questions, and he was like losing it. But
oh no, I saw that. I listened to this back when it first came out. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. He was. I mean, you're saying it's around the 30th minute?
Well, no, I think it's after. I couldn't find. I was trying to find it, but I was seeing it.
But I mean, isn't that kind of like asking Ronald McDonald about logistics and?
I mean, but Ronald McDonald said Ronald McDonald never said he was a logistics pioneer or making the logistics. This guy's on TV or on media saying he's a bank owner. He's starting a bank, not the front man, but it's his bank. And
but I mean, it kind of like when you shared that clip of Kevin Hart and venturing into the spirits, wine and spirits enterprise, and Kevin Hart had his own liquor, and he said he didn't know where it came from. He hadn't been to any of the agave plantations where his shit is harvested. So yeah, grain of salt. When they make these claims, grain of salt, take it with.
I mean, apparent, according to some people, Jared, your analysis is old. So even though you might have right, it doesn't work anymore. But here's again another evidence of something that you've been arguing that people really not willing to deal with. And maybe maybe people forgot about Greenwood Bank. I don't hear much about it as much. I know we read all of the some of the reviews, and they was already talking about how bad the bank was. But
yeah. I mean, just the fact, the last black-owned bank in Chicago is just, 4 blocks from my house, and people are losing homes and losing their savings left and right with that bank. And I know people, as I stated before, that black people that drive 3-4 hours out from Southern Illinois, coming over from Indiana, coming down from Michigan, just so they can say my money's with a black bank, and it is just squandering their effort and commitment to bank black. So, man, I'm not really even sure, but I guess because I just didn't see. I don't think the white middle class wasn't built up through private banks or even the banking industry itself, especially the existence of small banks, is a byproduct of government federal policy, set-asides, and regulatory protections. It's not a product of private enterprise investing in it. Even the white banks are a byproduct of welfare, set-asides, and policies. So Black people are trying to do something in terms of build collective wealth in a way that the people you're mimicking didn't do it, in a way that's never been done by any population, especially populations under genocidal oppressions. But even the populations that are given every consideration and every opportunity in the system didn't build wealth that way.
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely, yeah, this is absolutely part of the problem. And I was just looking for so I was looking through the transcript here, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, but Kara, the interviewer, asks Mike, "Are you going to put your money in the bank?" And then Mike says, "I absolutely am." Run
the statement.
And what seed funding? She asks, "Are you putting in money yourself into the creation? This is a startup, correct?" "Yeah, this is a startup. Yeah, I brought the equity of celebrity and a minimal amount." So then Kara asks, "So why banks?" Yeah. But so why banks? Because banking is a highly regulated business, and the government is always looking over your shoulder. Make sure you're not extending credit with too much risk. There's all kinds of rules going in. If you really wanted to incubate Black-owned businesses and literacy and organization, why not pursue a venture fund? Mike's response: "No, I'm getting educated. So part of this is going to be me calling you in a couple of days, like, educate me on venture funds. That's what this is what I've looked up."
Listen, the transcript doesn't do justice because they're not gonna record the way he was stuttering and fumbling through it, and then that was hella fun.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. And then it's a comment about the idiots and venture funds and stuff, and then they go into wardrobe.
I don't know if Sway is. Well, I assume she's a journalist, but the way in which the interview was approached. The first question she asked was something about X-Man or whatever. He was like, "Oh, I didn't know you was going to ask that question." I wouldn't think that would be the first question. So he was somewhat prepared for the interview, but she also kind of like set him up, and then kind of it felt like she was pretty much exposing his contradiction at that point. And so when he was stuttering, it seemed like he just wasn't, he wasn't prepared to answer that question. Obviously, he couldn't answer it anyway, but.
No, I think you're right. If you listen to it, I remember at the time it felt, I don't know if it was done intentionally, but it felt like it was just one of those moments where he was caught. I don't know what I'm talking about. And instead of that being the sort of the thread, he just went back into, as Diallo saying, Ronald McDonald, and I'm just going to start being the mascot again. And that's why I thought this story was. Again, all pettiness aside, I thought this story was important because it's not only misguiding sort of the Black capitalist community, which is one thing, but it is part of the trickle down thesis that reaches many at the so-called bottom who are convinced that they are there because they haven't taken these steps towards investment and flipping real estate and so on and so forth, and have hopes in these claims that Mike and others are making. But the reality is all they're trying to do is siphon what little they can get. And to your point about the age of the argument, part of what is, again, been a bit of a struggle for me is realizing just how old the argument that I've been making is. Not in other words, the argument I'm making against Black capitalism is as old as Black capitalism. So this attitude that many keep saying, well, Jared, you're advocating something that's old and we should try something new. I keep trying to remind them, no, my point is the critique I'm making is as old as your efforts at doing what you're doing. And that's the point. The critique has always been there to say this is not the way out. And instead of acknowledging that history, we get promoted the version that suggests that Black capitalism is the way out. And that's part of the propaganda of history, as Du Bois put it. But
what's your solution, Jared? Jared don't have any solutions. But
Jared
before we go to your
solutions, and when I say political power, they say,
what's that?
That's not. Are there Black credit unions we could consider? Thanks for the super chat, Arlene. Again, it's the credit union isn't going to solve the problem of wealth and income inequality in the Black community. So they are, I guess, a step up from banks, but they aren't a solution any more than I would argue, unfortunately, is this whole notion of cooperative economics. So So I don't know of any specific that we should or shouldn't consider.
Right. Well,
I just want to be clear that they're not.
It depends on the problem. You have to define what the problem. Maybe some people are engaging, saying, more immediate. What do I do tomorrow versus, when I get my next biweekly paycheck? What should I do with it? In terms of just navigating your individual interests, a credit union does have certain securities and doesn't take certain risk. But another problem with credit union is that they're harder to become members of. Some of them are, some credit, like a major credit union here, they do what they call credit checks. They run your credit and shit just to open an account with them. Some you have to be a member, like there's the the public service workers credit union, where you have to literally be a city or state employee. So even though credit unions will expose you to less volatility or risk than a corporate bank, it's more localized and more responsive locally. And even some could argue that its financial services are more receptive to the needs of the customers, but then they have a higher threshold to get in, to become a member, or to secure an account with. So on an individualized level, you really have to determine your short-term and longer term financial needs and goals before you make that determination. As a rule of thumb, you could say a credit union is a better choice for that, but you have to understand your own eligibility as well. But another thing if you travel a lot, credit unions don't tend to have access like ATMs, and you're really going to get burnt on that. So I would say probably a combo, especially if you have a job, or you're just for recreation, you like to travel and do work around the globe or around the country. A credit union is going to have you burnt, because I was a member of a credit union. I would just get beat to death with ATM fees back in the day.
So that actually remind me of that conversation. I think it was it was recorded, where seemed like some black nationalist was asking Fred Hampton, like, they was trying to sell a credit union idea to him. He's like, let me see the education plan. He's like, no, brother, you can. He's like, no, let me see the whole plan. And then he said, you know, I want to see the whole plan because by then we'll probably have Negro imperialists, and that's not where we're trying to go. And so
that the murder of Fred Hampton it's in that documentary.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Let's say we had if we did have black banks, what would exempt them from engaging in the same predatory behaviors and discriminatory behaviors that the other banks engage in?
Yeah.
I mean, if they're going to be quote unquote successful, they would have.
Right.